Remote, and the personal connection takes a little bit longer. Certainly, we're doing as much as we can virtually. Right now they're talking about MCAS in May over a 10, 11-day period for the sophomores. That could be canceled. You never know. And for the freshmen, again, for the 10th graders would be ELA. It would be math, and for the 9th graders, it would be physics. And that right now is still up in the air and is usually an early June test. So we'll keep you posted on that. Other than that, today we're going to get into the function of guidance, course selection, resources, Naviance, social emotional learning. And at 9 o'clock, we're going to turn it over to our experts and good friends at McLean's, who are going to field questions and talk about, what's a normal behavior for 9th and 10th graders. So we're very lucky to have that, and we hope you can stay, straight through till 10 o'clock. Feel free to get up, get a snack, obviously refresh your coffee. One thing I want to talk about is just getting involved. It does seem a little different, or maybe even more difficult, because we are remote. For a lot of the clubs and activities, sports are going on, which is a great thing, but some of the clubs will be meeting virtually. We encourage the students, especially 9th graders, to start to explore, to talk to upperclassmen when they can about what different activities they'd like to join. And it could be community service, it could be sports, it could be performing arts. This is an exploration. They don't have to commit. But we think, getting in something they are passionate about, they love, whether it's the math team, the science team, the chess club, which one of my students is trying to start up again. And a lot of these activities and clubs were started by students, and they're really student driven. There's a faculty advisor, but it's really wonderful to see how engaged and just how talented all these students are. So we really encourage to start getting involved, exploring as a 9th grader. And as a 10th grader, it's time to, if college is on the horizon, is to build that college resume. You don't have to do 5, 6 different activities, but you should start to be consistent about the activities you try to choose for sophomore, junior, senior year, and possibly become maybe a leader within that organization as you're a junior or senior. And again, it should be an activity that you enjoy, that you are passionate about. So that's really all I have. I'm going to turn it over now to Ms. Jessica Truslow.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Ms. Truslow, as Mr. Brown said, and I just want to thank you for taking a few minutes out of your day today to meet with us. We really appreciate it. So I'm here just to give a quick sort of 30,000 foot view, the overview of the functions of our guidance office. We're really here to serve as advocates for your children and as liaisons for both you and your children. And we stay with them throughout their high school career. So over those 4 years, we'll really get to know them, and we look forward to working with them. So we will support your children in a myriad of ways, but our responsibilities kind of fall into 3 large domains. The first of which is socio-emotional support. We're available to meet with your child and help them process any kind of challenging situation. And we really work to develop self-advocacy and agency when we meet with them, and help them to identify resources and how to resolve challenging situations. The second domain, if you will, is academic advising. And Mr. Wayne will speak a little bit more specifically about this in a moment. We support them through the course selection process, and then we're happy to meet with your child throughout the entire year to sort of tweak or address challenges with their classes, and how they might improve their organizational skills, or whatever the case may be. And then the third area really is post-secondary planning. We'll begin to meet with your children during sophomore year and begin some initial conversations about careers, resume writing, and the college selection process, more so in junior and senior year. And as well as, talking to them about gap year options, careers, military, all kinds of, just wherever their journey is going to take them, we can support them in that process. As you may know, this year, with scheduling challenges due to the hybrid schedule, as Mr. Brown said, developing relationships, and getting to meet all of your children is taking a little bit more time than we ideally like, due to wellness being and POSDEC being in the beginning of during the first semester. Your children were very busy. So we are going to be reaching out to them to make appointments, or please encourage them to reach out to us. We want to make sure that we connect names and faces and begin that relationship building process with your child as soon as possible, if we haven't already been able to do so. So at this point, I'll turn the presentation over to Mr. Wayne.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Matt Ruane, and I'll be discussing course selection, which is actually coming up soon. Now, the nice thing is this will not be your student's first course selection at Belmont High, or it shouldn't be. Believe it or not, we were able to meet with them last year, right before the school shut down. And our plan is to meet with them again this year, but we're going to be doing everything on a virtual platform through Google Meet. In the middle of March, we're going to be connecting with all sophomores, and we're going to help them select their courses for next year. Okay, we're going to listen to their choices, offer them advice, but ultimately they'll be able to choose which courses they would like to take. Now, in more extreme situations, if a student is struggling and really wants to over-challenge themselves, we may need to have a quick meeting with the parent and the department director, just to make sure that everyone's aware of the jump. But again, hopefully we don't have too many of those. Just wanted to make sure everyone was aware. Now, starting in February break, students can touch base with their teachers if they want to discuss their course selections. Teachers are a student's best resource, okay? They'll give them honest feedback. They'll tell each student where they might find the most success. And the way we view success is where a student will feel accomplished, but also challenged. It's important to remember, however, that teachers don't necessarily know what other courses a student's planning on taking. So where they may find a student, bright and hardworking enough to take an honors level course in their subject, they may not be in full support of a student taking an honors level course in every subject. So, while their advice is definitely something you want to consider, make sure that they understand the big picture as well. Okay, and when we discuss course selection, we're usually talking about college prep versus honors. Now, again, you guys may be a little familiar with this, but we see college prep courses as our regular ed courses for each grade. These classes have a deep curriculum, but they focus more on the understanding of key concepts rather than how many concepts we can get through. Honors courses are more advanced, where the pace of the course is much faster. They also require more independent studying. So that's something you may want to consider when thinking about whether or not your student is capable of or should take a honors level class. If a student has a particular strength or interest in a subject, then they may want to consider taking an honors level class. But again, if it's something that they're not interested in, if it's something that's going to be, challenging for them, college prep classes are fantastic as well. We also have AP or advanced placement classes, which are even faster than honors. And these courses are college level courses that prepare students for standardized AP exams in May. When students are choosing their courses, they should try to balance the more demanding classes with the less demanding classes. They should also consider the extracurriculars and outside commitments that they have or plan on participating in. We want our students to enjoy playing music, acting, running track, performing community service. We don't want them simply studying for 8 hours every night. For us, it's more important that they're getting enough sleep, that they're making time for friends and family. Because although, we value education for sure, our priority is always the mental and physical well-being of our students. And certainly in years like this, that's been magnified. So, that's our number one goal. So anyways, just keep an eye out for Principal Taylor's newsletter. He's going to be providing further instructions on course selection. Our students are going to be selecting their courses through Plus Portals, just like they did last year. And again, we'll review their choices with them next month. In the meantime, we're happy to answer any questions you may have. Okay. Now I'm going to be passing it off to Ms. King.
Thank you, Mr. Wayne. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming this morning. Today, I'm going to talk about the academic resources for your students. We can't say this enough. This is a very different year. So we've added a couple more resources for them, and it's making it a little bit more easier to navigate this whole hybrid remote challenging schedule that they have. So new this year in your students' schedule is XBlock. And what it is it's free time for your student to access extra help with a teacher, talk to us, or even access a peer tutor that we have available. So this happens every Tuesday and every Friday at 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. It is important that you're aware of that so that you can encourage your student to utilize this program. My best advice with this, there is a program called Enriching Students. Your student should know what that is, but I also encourage my students to send an email to the teacher or the counselor that they want to meet with, just to give them a heads up that they're signing up. Regarding the peer tutors, those are all online now, and that's such a great resource. If your student is interested in accessing a peer tutor for extra help, have them email us. And they can also contact Miss Landry in the library if they're aware of her email as well. Okay. Keeping it all balanced is very difficult in this remote setting. And I'm really encouraging both your student and your families to utilize Plus Portals and Google Classroom in order to keep up with your academics and to make sure just everything's on track, right? There's no missing assignments. You're keeping up with everything. These two programs can really help your students stay on track. So if you are interested in accessing a Google Classroom for a specific class, please reach out to that teacher or have your student help you reach out to that teacher. And Plus Portals you should have access to, and if for whatever reason you don't, just send your guidance counselor an email. Okay, but both of those programs can help you monitor your child and make sure that they're turning in their assignments. And just one last note, not exactly related to resources, but I wanted to touch upon standardized tests. It's in the back of everyone's mind. I know you have freshmen and sophomores and you may not be thinking about it yet. We're having 165 students signed up for the PSATs, sophomore students, at the end of February, and we're really excited to give them a chance to take the PSATs. These exams will be offered again junior year, so they're practice for the SAT. And of course, we're hoping next year is a lot more easier to manage without any COVID restrictions, knock on wood. So, you know, and I believe one of us already mentioned AP exams. Some ninth graders and 10th graders are registered for AP exams. By no means does your 9th and 10th grader need to be registered for an AP exam, but that's something you can think about, especially if your 9th grader is considering signing up for an AP class next year. If you would like more information on standardized testing, there is actually a presentation tonight. It's hosted by Summit Educational Group, and they're going to review the whole process with you. So everything you need to know about the SATs, the ACTs, and any other standardized exams that you may need for college and beyond. And that is tonight. It should be posted on our website with the webinar link. And if you have any questions about standardized tests, that will definitely be answered. So I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Ross, who's going to talk a little bit about Naviance.
Thank you, Ms. King. Good morning, everybody. And yes, Naviance is a software program. It's a web-based program that we offer to all students. We have one account for the school. It's something you probably have not heard of if you do not have older students in the district, and that is totally fine. Your students will be getting accounts this year with our typically our 9th graders get accounts at the beginning of the year. And as we've mentioned too, just with the shifting of everything, it's been a little bit difficult for us to get these students in groups. Typically we have them come into our offices, we give them a little slip of paper, we make them do this in front of us so that we see that it happens. So we're still trying to figure out the most efficient way to get Naviance accounts to the 9th graders, but we will do it. The 10th graders already do have their accounts. And in terms of the curriculum and what we do and the function of Naviance being this wonderful web-based resource that we have, which really helps with our component of the future planning aspect of the function of guidance. So in 10th grade, we do some workshops with the students that relate to resume building. There are really great ways in Naviance that your student can put in information about things that they've done, different activities, get them thinking about the whole aspect of what a resume is, how it can relate to them, maybe looking for internships or a part-time job, gathering and collecting information so that they have that when they do college applications. We really do try to stress that a lot with the students and how important it is to keep a list, a running list somewhere of all of that stuff that they do, because as we all know, when you sit down to do some sort of an application, trying to rack your brain on where you did things can be a little bit challenging. So it's helping them kind of just do that organizational process for themselves. Also involved with those 10th grade workshops, which we have already done this year with the students. We did those during X blocks. Another component of those are having the students go through some interest inventories in Naviance. One is essentially the Myers-Briggs personality type. There's also one called a career interest inventory, where the students will go through 2 different scenarios and say, yeah, that one sounds appealing, that one doesn't sound appealing, and it's really lengthy, and it makes them just start thinking about things that they could potentially have interest in. And it's not something to prescribe what you have to do when you grow up, but it's just a nice way for students to start getting self-reflective and start just thinking about what makes them tick and what they're interested in. Also involved with that is mechanisms that get them into looking at different colleges, different majors, different careers. There's so much in Naviance. Really, if your kid's bored on any given day and they don't know what to do and they're 10th grader, apologize to the 9th grader. If you really want to push your 9th graders, you can contact us. We'll figure out how to get the accounts for them. But it's a great way for students to just start taking a look at careers, at colleges, at different options. And it's really just an exploratory phase in 10th grade is the function of Naviance. Moving into 11th grade, the activities that we begin doing with students is a lot of the college search. And Naviance has essentially 3 tabs, and there's one that says colleges. Within that tab, there are so many different ways for students to begin exploring colleges and starting to get a sense of things and components about college that would be important to them. Basic thing. I mean, sometimes students will come into our offices and say, I have no clue. Like, okay, let's start with one factor of something. Do you want to be in New England anymore? Yes or no, I just want to get so far away from the cold. All right, so let's just have that be your first function of what you're looking at. And There's a function in Naviance called Supermatch, which is incredibly helpful at having students just start thinking about what makes them tick, what's important to them. Also, what's really great about Naviance is it is a web-based tool specific for Belmont High School. So when students do start to look at colleges, there's a lot of information that helps them understand when they're looking at a particular college, how previous Belmont students have fared in admissions processes at that institution. We have a lot of information for a lot of schools. I mean, if your student's looking at maybe a school that's in a state very, very far away and it's very small, we might not have a lot of comparative data, but it is really super helpful for students to just start getting a sense of what would be a realistic school, what might be a reach school. And we do go through workshops with the students junior year to help them start figuring that stuff out. And then moving into 12th grade with Naviance, we do a lot of Naviance is just it's essentially, I call it our mailing system. It's our old fashioned mailing system. So students will really have to get into Naviance if they are doing college applications. And again, that's a ways off, and I won't go into a whole lot of detail on that. But for right now with your 9th and 10th graders, again, like I said, if they think that there's absolutely nothing to do in a day, have them go on Naviance, because there's some pretty cool stuff in there. So I will wrap that up and turn the presentation over to Ms. Turner, who is going to talk about some social emotional stuff.
Welcome. Thank you, Ms. Ross. I have 9th and 10th graders with last names S-I through Z. And before I finish, I'm going to go through a few social emotional things, and then I'm also going to just bring you over to the guidance webpage, show you where the list is so you can see exactly which guidance counselor your student has if you don't know yet. But we thank you for joining us this morning. Some things just to keep in mind in terms of as your student goes through high school. They're all different. You really want to make sure you're looking at them as individuals. Try hard not to compare them to their siblings, to your neighbors, to their friends. They all have different strengths, different personalities, and their personality types and how they, how resilient they are and how they deal with things that come up. All will have an impact. I'm just going to point out a few things that I've definitely noticed over the years in terms of different personality types and things to keep in mind that I'd like to share with you. If your student tends to be a perfectionist, okay, so we all know perfectionists try to make things perfect. They are put in a lot of extra time in focus on the details of things. So when our teachers or the counselors are saying, this type of class may require an hour of homework, okay? Your perfectionist lots of times is going to take even longer than that normal typical range. Some classes, such as our AP history classes, require in the past, this year they're doing things a little differently, but in the past they do a lot of note taking. So the perfectionist personality, it will take them a long time. So that's definitely something, to consider. It's something that we, if we know, and as we get to know your student, we will be able to make different recommendations to them, but just something to keep in mind. That note taking can be more stressful for that type of student. For a student who may be more organizationally challenged, okay, they may need a little bit more support from you. And those of you that have had students who have already gone through here, you may notice you may have one child that, can keep track of everything on their own, then others, may just have a more difficult time with that. So if you notice at the progress report time that they're missing assignments, don't hesitate to reach out to the teacher and just with your child. The goal is obviously for them to be able to do it themselves, but if they're falling behind on a lot of things, don't hesitate to reach out to the teacher and just try to assist them, help them, making sure that they're making lists of what they have to do. Just some little organizational things like that can really help them not feel so overwhelmed. And, for some students, the hybrid, in-person some days and the remote stuff, is hard. So it does depend on, the student. So don't hesitate to, it's okay if you need to help them with that, especially in 9th and 10th grade. For students who may be more driven, okay, this is a very competitive high school with a lot of very smart and motivated students. And there's a lot of, they're not all in the building at the same time right now. So that's the one little good thing. They're not all, comparing themselves as much as they might be if they were in the building. But you want to make sure you're checking in with them, checking in on their stress levels. If they seem like they're completely stressing out, our counselors from McLean's are going to talk a little bit about this too. But don't hesitate to reach out to the guidance counselor. We can help you as far as giving some advice, on how to get them some additional supports. And as they go through high school, please remind them there are many different paths to their future. It's not all dependent on a certain, specific group of 8 or 10 colleges. They can be happy at many different places. So just help them stay open-minded about that. The student who may be overscheduled, okay, a student's trying to get involved in tons and tons of activities. Remind them there's only so many hours in a day. They need to be able to find that balance that Mr. Ruane was talking about. Being also able to, have time for school, have time for their activities, but being able to, to manage it efficiently. One example in our school play in the past tends to take up a lot of hours right before that month before the month before the play, happens. So we lots of times will see students, becoming overwhelmed, not able to balance all their schoolwork with those activities. So just keep in mind, know what your student is involved in and make sure that they're not completely overscheduled. And then the student who may be, not quite yet academically focused as you would like. Okay, just know that they're going to mature. We see, every year we see 9th graders, 10th graders that aren't as focused on their academics, but they mature and they will be. They will get there. Keep encouraging them. We will keep encouraging them. But no, that's not completely abnormal. 14 and 15-year-olds are very focused on the here and now. Thinking about the future scares them. So lots of times they don't want to even think about it. Let alone, make a plan for it. Okay, so in addition, some other things just to keep in mind as far as self-advocacy. We have some 9th and 10th graders who are great self-advocates, have no problem, asking questions in class or reaching out to a teacher or a counselor for some help. And then we have a lot of 9th and 10th graders who are absolutely terrified to do that. So if that's something that you notice that is difficult for your student, please reach out to the guidance counselor, because that's something that we can work with them on. We can help them, take little steps as far as reaching out to the teachers. We can let the teachers know that that's something that's challenging for them and help them improve at it. Our goal is obviously to have them all be great self-advocates by the time that they graduate. Sleep and health. Okay, very important. The American Academy of Sleep still recommends that 13 to 18-year-olds have 8 to 10 hours of sleep. We know that on the weekends they may get that, but not necessarily during the week. Do what you can to keep an eye on it. I know you cannot, be up in the middle of the night checking, are they still awake? Did they put their phone down? Are they off the computer? But those, if they're not getting enough sleep or they're, missing, waking up in the morning or not waking up, on time for their classes, you can reach out for supports. Lack of sleep definitely impacts, anxiety levels. It, can impact depression, can impact your health. It can also impact your ability to focus. So just, keep trying to remind them the importance of all of those things in order for us for them to be balanced and, able to function in a healthy way as they go through high school. So we're having a bunch of questions that have come in as I have been on here. So before I get to the questions, I just want to point out, and I think I can do it. I'm going to try to share my screen. Oh, nope, I can't share my screen. Okay, Ms. King, I don't know if you can share the screen for the guidance webpage.
Let me try. I think I can.
Okay. So I just want to point out a few things on our guidance webpage. I'll just quickly go through the alphabet real quick. So for 9th graders, I'm going to do the 9th grade first. 9th graders with last names A through COO have Miss Ross as their guidance counselor. 9th graders with last names COR through HAN have Mr. Brown. Great, thank you. Mr. Ruane has 9th graders HAR through LES. Miss King has 9th graders LEV through N. Ms. Truslow has 9th graders and 10th graders with last names O through SH. And as I mentioned, I have 9th and 10th graders SI through Z. Then for the 10th grade, the beginning of the alphabet, Miss Ross has A through C. Mr. Brown has D through HA. Mr. Ruane has 10th graders HE through LIT. And Miss King has 10th graders LIU through N. Okay, so a few other things just on the guidance webpage. Miss Ross has it here. If you scroll to the top of it, okay, a few things just want to point out in our big maroon little banner area, that's where we'll put any upcoming webinar information. We will add the testing information for tonight, because I actually don't see that on there, but we'll make sure that's up after we get off this meeting. And any past presentations we have given are also listed up there. The guidance newsletters we put out monthly for 9th and 10th graders. So we have the archives, they're all listed here. So feel free to check those every month. They're also posted in your students' Guidance Google Classroom. And on the left-hand side, we have a list. There's a bunch of different, tabs that connect them to each year, things that they should be thinking about, college planning timeline. The course selection link will get updated. It does have things from last year, but that will get updated shortly. It does have an old program of studies, which actually the classes in there are the classes that will be, most of them will be offered again next year. So if you want to just look at that, you can. And then I just want to point out this resources for parents and students. So if you click on that link, there's a lot of outside support service agency information, websites, and links that are there. So just know that is also a resource for all of you, and we point that out to the students as well. And then mostly for 10th graders and up, but if your student is taking an AP class, the AP exam information or any other information will also be posted on that guidance homepage right in the middle. Ms. King is great about keeping us updated to the ever-changing AP world. Okay, so let's switch over to the questions. I don't know if any counselors want to jump in if you've seen them since I've been talking. Okay, one question we have here is, oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, just I did forget to mention that too. In terms of parent accounts for Naviance, parents will receive accounts that are when your student is a junior, and it's very much of an overview account where you can go in and take a look at what your student's done. So we really do encourage, if you want to get into Naviance with your student, they should know their password. If they don't, you can do a function to reset it. There's nothing that private in there that shouldn't be something that your student could share with you.
And one of the questions in there again was asking about MCAS and AP tests for 10th graders, and how that might be really stressful if they have that at the same time. We will do everything we can to make sure that they're not obviously having to take those back to back. Every year they do always have MCAS makeup dates, so that might be something that is also we can work on, but Ms. King will be definitely advocating for that when she meets with the principal as well as other people about that for May. So we'll do whatever we can.
And just so the parents know that the state and College Board has graciously given us some options. So I believe we can figure out a way to coordinate both those exams, and we'll do the best for your students. And we'll let you know as soon as we figured it out.
So we can definitely, one question here is bringing up a concern about the weight of the mastery assignments, and that they are typically can be given during the shorter afternoon time sessions, and having more weight on those. That's something that the guidance counselors have brought up as well, as far as the weighting, because the classes all differ. Some classes have fewer mastery assignments, and it doesn't seem fair. We'll continue to advocate, for a more balanced approach to the grading system as well. If you have a specific, concern about a specific class, please reach out to the guidance counselor so that they can maybe advocate, specifically for that, for the student and probably others as well that might be in that class. And then, okay, so any counselor, feel free to chime in on this question. So this is one of our first ones. What do you do with a child who refuses to engage or try out activities other than gaming? So we all know that video gaming obviously is an activity that a lot of students are really into, and during this last year has increased even more so. However, if it is such a problem that they're not doing anything else, it's impacting their sleep, you can't get them to get off the computer at all, they may need some, additional supports. There are, and we can actually ask our McLean's counselors, because I know in the past McLean's has had groups for video game addiction. So if there's that level of video game addiction, and then there's also, what's normal, teenagers are spending, time, it's a way for them to connect right now, so if they're doing it and they're connecting and they're being social and it's not impacting everything else, then obviously that's okay. I think students, they want to do what they feel comfortable with. Some students are more, secure with who they are and are willing to try new things, whereas others, don't want to try anything new because if they're not going to be good at it. So I think, and everyone please chime in too, keep trying to encourage them to do things. We can definitely send out our club list again to all of our students and put it on our guidance Google Classrooms to encourage students to try, some new activities. Others want to add?
I'll just jump in here. As the parent of two middle school aged boys, this is a frequent topic of conversation in our house and in our neighborhood. When I see, other parents out and about, this is one of the first questions, because frankly, this is a primary way that my children are socializing with one another at this point in time. And I think Ms. Turner's point about so many of the activities have been limited for our children. It's harder to engage outside of the home or to participate in the activities that they do enjoy in the way they used to do so. So by default, as a way to socialize, I think many children are gaming more, and that it is that constant sort of assessment of is it interfering with other activities, or are they sleeping less as a result because they're gaming late at night, and trying to set boundaries and encourage them to, even if it's getting outside for 15 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, weave in some exercise, even if it's, solitary and not with a group, just to kind of break that cycle of being on the computer all the time. But I think, what the norms have shifted in the pandemic, and we also need to be kind to ourselves as parents to know that options are fewer. And if it is helping our kids to stay connected in some way, then maybe we can be a little flexible, but we really need to be mindful of when it carries over too far and they're not connecting with people in other ways or getting exercise, or it is interfering with other activities, homework, sleep, other healthy endeavors as well.
Just want to answer so for the 11th grader who has not been able to find their Naviance code, just please reach out to the guidance counselor. We will we can resend the code and the link to them. So that's totally fine. 10th graders do have accounts for Naviance. 9th graders will eventually get them. So I know there was a question on that. The question about, is it recommended to take the phone from your freshmen at night to encourage them to sleep later? By all means, if you can, do it. Obviously, a lot of them will fight back on it quite strongly. The social media and the phones, it's such an addiction that they're gonna push back on it. Most of them. Do what you can to try to implement some rules with it. If you can get them to hey, you have to plug your phone in over here, in my room or somewhere else, at night, so they're not on it all night. If you notice that they're up a lot, you can definitely try it. Having already raised, gone through the teenage years with one of my children, I know that that's not easy to do. But I think encouraging healthy social media habits, reminding them that the social media stuff and the guidance, we can help too, talk with them about it. It definitely can lead to, a lot of other things that aren't so healthy as far as self-esteem and all of that, and taking a break, maybe doing it as a family. We're going to do a, no electronics at all, on one Sunday every month or once a week, or, however often you might be able to do that in your family.
Another way to maybe explore that is to have a Wi-Fi off time every night too. instead of physically taking the phone. That could eliminate some of the issue, and just getting in a routine with that. But yeah, I agree with Ms. Turner.
And we will post we'll post the clubs both in the Google Classroom for the students, but we'll also try to put it up on the guidance webpage so you can have access to it as well. And then maybe find something on there and encourage your student to do it. And another suggestion was in there for the guidance to have links to fun activities or wellness related stress relief sites. We can see if we can add some more. There are some on that references page that we pulled up. There are some mental health toolkits and some website stuff that are on there, but we can definitely try to add some others as well. Oh, yeah. They use the phone data instead of the Wi-Fi. Yeah, you may have to take the phone. You're probably paying the phone bill. Just remind them that.
I think we need to move on to,
Let us introduce our wonderful McLean's consultants. So with no further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Michelle Silverman and Dr. Julia Birch Martin, who are going to talk with you about what are normal behaviors versus behaviors to look out for amongst your teenagers, as well as mention some signs and symptoms of anxiety and depression and answer some questions that had come in prior to our presentation.
Yes, thank you, Sherry, and good to see everybody, the whole crew and parents out there. Just a quick heads up, it looks like I can't share my screen yet. So whoever's the host, if you could enable that, because we do have a PowerPoint that we're hoping to present. But we're really excited to be with you here today.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you just send it? I think you have to send it to Miss King. Can you quickly send it so she can post it up there? Because I'm not sure if I think on our Zoom account, only the head person can advance it.
Sure, can do.
Sorry about that.
Thank you.
It's okay.
Different technology options are always an adventure. Thanks, Ms. Kim.
Thank you for your patience.
And while we're doing that, I'll just answer this so the hours of sleep that's required for this age group is 8 to 10 per the Academy of Sleep people. And off-screen hours, on-screen hours. Dr. Martin.
Michelle, I actually just made you a host, and I think you should be able to share your screen now.
It did. Perfect. Thank you, Brittany.
Awesome. You're welcome.
All right. So as Sherry said earlier, Julia and I work at the McLean Anxiety Mastery Program. We're also part of the school consultation service. So we've gotten to work really closely with your high school mental health team, all these folks up here. And today we'll be talking about raising adolescents in this theme of like, what's normal, what's not, when do you want to seek help? And we have a few slides, and then we're going to answer some of the questions that we got in advance. And if there's time at the end, we can answer some questions live as well. So as kind of a general rule of thumb, when it comes to figuring out like what's a typical behavior versus, when should you seek help? I think the first thing Julia and I always say is to trust your gut as a parent, right? To trust your instincts. If you just have this feeling in your gut, like something is up with my kid, they're not acting the way they normally do, something's not right, it never hurts just to have a conversation with your child's pediatrician, with their school counselor, one of these folks up here, or to consult with an outside, child psychologist or psychiatrist. But these are just kind of like a general rule of thumb that if you're seeing a pattern in any of these three kind of categories, that it could be a sign that you might want to seek help for your teen. And that first category is if your teen's behavior is causing impairment in one or more domains, which is just kind of like a jargony way of saying that if you're noticing major changes in your child's functioning, whether it's their academic work, their social activity, their hygiene, their extracurricular activities, if suddenly they're kind of backsliding or struggling in those domains and it's becoming pretty consistent, could be a sign that they need some support. And I think all of that is sort of under the caveat of it's a pandemic right now. And so naturally, like we might see some decline in social connection, extracurricular activities, but kind of knowing your kid at baseline and seeing how they've been over the past like almost year at this point, you should have a sense of kind of what's typical for your teen. The second rule of thumb is if your teen is subjectively distressed. So like if they are reporting that they are feeling depressed or they're feeling anxious, for a lot of teens and kids, this can come through as somatic complaints. So oftentimes with anxiety and depression, kids might have headaches, they might have stomach aches, they might complain of nausea, might have difficulty sleeping. And if they've talked to their doctor about it and kind of ruled out a medical concern, that can be a potential sign that they're struggling with anxiety or depression or something else. And the third category is if the teen's responses seem disproportionate to the event. And what we mean by that is if their kind of reactions to things seem so out of proportion to what's triggering it. So for example, some jitters before a test, totally normal. Refusing to go to school and, bursting into tears because they have to give a presentation, not quite as normal at that, at 9th or 10th grade at that point. Similarly, if kids are fighting over the remote, maybe kids kind of sulking or not speaking to one another for a few minutes, maybe that's typical for your kid. But if, they're getting physically aggressive, they're throwing things, they're not kind of bouncing back after something like that, that's pretty minor, again, could be a sign that they're struggling with depression or something else. So again, if you're kind of seeing a consistent pattern in any of these three categories, again, it can't hurt to reach out, talk to your child's pediatrician, talk to the school, or consider an evaluation with a therapist. Julie, anything you want to add to that? Okay. So we have a very long list here of what are some typical adolescent behaviors. And I think this is a big question. What's normal, what's not? And again, I just want to say these are all sort of general guidelines. Your kid, your family values. And so some of these you might not totally agree with, but in general, this is what we sort of consider typical teen behavior. We would expect to see it's developmentally appropriate. So that includes things like increased moodiness, right? More irritability, snarkiness, things like that. Increased self-consciousness. So a lot of teens, especially girls, sort of have this I'm on stage, everything is sort of in front of other people. I think social media probably promotes that idea, focusing on body image, right? So being really extra self-conscious about how they look in certain things, maybe spending more time putting on makeup in front of the mirror, things like that. Increased dawdling. So a lot of teens get distracted a little bit more easily. They might move a little bit more slowly or kind of lose their focus. Increased parent-adolescent conflict. I don't think this is news to anybody that because of that increased moodiness and kind of desire for autonomy that, teens pick fights, they're going to be moodier. They're going to there might be more arguing, kind of talking back. Experimentation with drugs or alcohol and with sexual activity. Again, this is one of those where there's not an exact line of what's normal, but in general, experimenting, trying different things, dating, things like that, that is typical for teens. Feeling stressed about decisions, so getting nervous about, when it comes time for college applications or kind of deciding which activities they should do, maybe dealing with a conflict with a friend. Increased desire for privacy. So this is a big one. We got a lot of questions about teens wanting to hole up in their room or not spend time with family. Totally normal. It's, if anything, I'd be worried if a teen was really eager to spend all their time with their family. It's at that point, their brain is so focused on peers and fitting in socially. And so they are going to want more privacy. They might be a little bit more withdrawn from the family. Stressful transitions to high school and between grades. So a lot of teens, may have been used to in middle school kind of being a big fish in a small pond. Maybe they were doing really well academically. Maybe they were popular. And then shifting to high school where there's a lot more kids, it's possible that, they don't feel that way anymore. Maybe they're not such a big fish anymore. And that can be a really tough adjustment. I think similarly, just as the academic load increases, it requires better executive functioning, better kind of time management. And that can be a hard transition for kids, especially I would say in 9th and 10th grade. At shifts in sleep cycle. So we see a lot of teens who are kind of flip-flopping and becoming night owls and then consequently sleeping in on weekends. You might see that. Kids staying up late, using screen times. They often don't have a great ability to control their impulses with screen time and to say okay, it's 11, I should turn this up. Typically they're scrolling through their social media. Similarly strong interest in technology and social media. So I'm sure this is not a surprise to any parent out there, but kids are all about social media. They are glued to their screens, especially now during the pandemic, totally normal. A couple more: increased sense of invulnerability. So this is this idea that like teens feel invincible. They often don't think about like the consequences of their actions. So that's why teens engage in riskier behavior, experimenting with drugs. For example, maybe not wearing a seatbelt when they know they should, or doing something stupid on their skateboards without a helmet, right? Like I think we see this all the time. They just don't have like that fully baked prefrontal cortex. So they're not always thinking about the consequences. And then lastly, we kind of talked about this earlier, but increased argumentativeness. Idealism is another one. A lot of our teens in a really cool way are, very into social justice, but they might have these really strong ideals and kind of disagree with you on big things and almost act as though like they know everything, like they're 16 and they're experts on the world. And that's also really normal. It's part of that identity development. And then finally, criticism, like really about anything, about your parenting style, about your, the cooking that you do. Mom, you just don't know anything. Dad, like you don't get it. Just again, that kind of like, they're probably going to be your worst critics for a while. And I'll pause there. Feel free to jump in if anyone wants to add anything. So again, these are all sort of within the realm of typical teen behavior. It doesn't mean they're pleasant to experience as a parent. And then we just wanted to make a note of like sort of within the caveat of the pandemic, what are we kind of seeing? And so this is both based on research, but also just anecdotally of the teens that we see in our clinic and, the parents that we work with. So some things that we're seeing even more of now during COVID: lower mood, probably doesn't come as a surprise, between, decreased access to social connection and the winter blues, lower mood for sure, more socially isolated, increased screen time, again, like even more than normal, disruptions in sleep routine, kids feeling less motivated and less engaged during remote learning. So we're seeing and hearing from a lot of kids, this is really across districts and across age levels, that kids are just really struggling to stay engaged, especially with remote learning. And so we have a very long list here of, okay, so we've talked about the sort of typical behaviors. What are some things that might be cause for concern? So the first is intense, long-lasting, low or irritable mood, risky mood-driven behavior, self-injury, or suicidal thinking. So this is kind of a big category, but basically if you're seeing drastic changes in their mood, if they're engaging in dangerous behaviors and anything involving self-injury, that is cause for concern, and that, might be time to seek outside support. Social withdrawal, perfectionism, and unrealistic standards, which could potentially include eating disordered behaviors. So more than just your typical self-consciousness, but really like engaging in binging, purging, restricting eating, things like that, or becoming obsessive about or neglectful of hygiene. So spending like hours in front of the mirror, refusing to go out because they don't like how they look. Or some of our kids are perfectionists when it comes to academics. So they might like read and reread something or write something and then erase it and rewrite it. And it takes them hours to turn in a paper just because they're having these really unrealistic expectations of how things need to be, quote unquote, perfect. We said that dawdling is common, but if kids are so distracted that they're not able to complete their work or other tasks, again, that might be cause for concern. Irritability, normal. Verbal or physical aggression, not typical. So hitting, throwing things, breaking things, using really disrespectful language, running away, things like that, cause for concern. Substance abuse, selling drugs, unsafe sexual practices. We talked about how indecision is common, but if kids are becoming paralyzed by that indecision, like they're not able to decide what assignment to do first, and so they're just stuck and they can't start their work, or they can't decide what shirt to wear, things like that, that should be fairly easy, decisions to make. That might be a sign of like anxiety, for example. Routine lying, hiding things, isolating from the family. And I think that isolating one, again, has a little caveat during COVID, and we're going to talk more about that with the questions. But, if this is kind of a part of your family value, that you are honest about things, and then all of a sudden they're lying, they're hiding things. And if this is becoming a pattern, that could be cause for concern. If your kids are frequently up all night and sleeping all day on the weekend, so they're completely nocturnal and it's leading to like being late for school routinely or missing school, it could be worth talking to their pediatrician about like their sleep routine. Multiple accidents, using firearms, driving drunk, getting arrested. I think those are all pretty self-explanatory. And then we talked about social media, normal, excessive time online or like unsafe internet activity, like they're sharing personal information with strangers, sexting, posting pictures of themselves online, things like that. That's risky, or engaging in like, bullying, cyberbullying, for example. School refusal, bullying or being bullied, dropping out of school, and of course, law breaking or disrespecting authority figures. I think those are more obvious ones. So related to this, we had a lot of questions about depression and kind of what are the warning signs of depression. And so I guess before we go through the list, something that's important to know about like how in the psychology world we define depression, it's comparing your child's current functioning to baseline. So sort of knowing how they are day to day, are you suddenly seeing shifts in these things? And it has to be for most of the day, nearly every day. So it's pretty consistent. It's not like, oh, this is just happening right after school in the evenings, or it's just happening in the morning when they're irritable. And it has to cause either significant impairment, meaning, again, it's getting in the way of their day-to-day functioning, or it's causing distress. So they're feeling really upset about it. They want support. They don't, they're struggling and asking for help.
And I'll just jump in real quick and add as well. We often think about, or part of actually our diagnostic criteria is that all of these need to have been showing up most of the day, nearly every day, causing the impairment for a 2-week period. That's to yield kind of a diagnosis of a depressive episode. And it's not to say that if your kid is having a number of these symptoms most of the day, nearly every day for 6, 7, 8 days, like that is still concerning. But just to give you guys some context, before we would label something as depression, it's actually a 2-week period of this continuously happening.
That's a great point. Yeah, thank you, Julia. Okay, so some signs you want to look out for: depressed mood, hopeless, sad, or if your child is reporting or seeming kind of empty or numb, those can be signs of depression. Diminished pleasure in activities that were previously enjoyable. So if they used to really enjoy playing with the dog and all of a sudden they don't even seem interested in playing with the dog, or if they previously were artistic and really like doing collaging at home and now all of a sudden you notice they haven't done that at all, right? That could be a sign that they're depressed. Significant changes in appetite or weight, and this can go in either direction. So if they're suddenly eating way more than they usually do, like potentially binge eating or just excessively eating and gaining weight, or a lot of people when they're depressed kind of go in the opposite direction and seem to have lost their appetite and might be losing weight. Similarly, significant changes in sleep. Again, it could be excessive sleeping, so they just can't get out of bed. They seem tired no matter how much sleep they get. Or if they're more like kind of insomnia-like symptoms where they're having trouble falling asleep and staying up late and are tired during the day. Slowed movement, fatigue, or loss of energy. So when individuals are depressed, they often just feel kind of slowed down. They feel like, their body is heavy. It's hard to kind of move. And you might even see them just kind of moving a little bit slower than usual, or they seem fatigued, even though, they are reporting enough sleep, kind of an adequate number of hours of sleep. A couple other ones to look out for: feelings of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt. And this might not necessarily be something that your teens are reporting to you, but this is something that diagnostically a psychologist would ask about. So feeling like they're a burden to their family, or that, things should be easier. This shouldn't be so hard to get out of bed or to do their work, and feeling really guilty, feeling like I'm worthless as a human. That's often a sign of depression. Difficulty concentrating or making decisions. So often when kids or individuals are struggling with depression, it's hard for them to make even basic decisions. So just deciding, again, like, what do I wear today? I don't know what I want to pack for lunch. Things that should be pretty easy or trivial to make a decision about feel really hard, or they have a hard time concentrating, often because their mind is ruminating on some of these other thoughts. And then, of course, recurrent thoughts of death, suicidal ideation, a plan. So if they're reporting how they might kill themselves or an attempted suicide. Again, this might not be something your teen directly reports to you, but if you happen to see that they've written something down, like a note or to a school counselor, that's a sign for sure that you would want to seek support and make sure that there's a thorough, evaluation done and a risk assessment in place. And so we didn't put a slide up for anxiety. I know there was a request. The reason is because anxiety, there's so many different buckets, right? You could have social anxiety. You could have a specific phobia of something like spiders or the dark. It can look very different. So, but just some kind of like things about anxiety to look out for. People who have anxiety often experience physiological sensations in their body. It kind of kicks in that fight or flight mode. So that includes things like increased heart rate, which can lead to shallow breathing, tense muscles, dry mouth, sweaty palms, stomach aches because our digestion slows down. I'm trying to think, Julie, let me know what else I'm missing. I think those are the big ones.
I think those are the big ones.
Those are the big ones. Yeah. And it's
temperature changes, headaches.
Temperature changes. Yeah. Yeah. It can lead to a lot of physical sensations as well, because the body again is going into fight or flight mode. So that's a big one. And then avoidance is another really common one with anxiety. So typically when people are anxious about something, they are avoiding a setting, a person, a situation, an activity that provokes that anxiety. So for example, if somebody's struggling with social anxiety, they might avoid like raising their hand in class, hanging out with friends, going on Zoom and turning their camera on. If somebody has anxiety about vomit, that's a really common one, actually. It's called emetophobia. They might avoid like going near a doctor's office. If somebody is sick, even if they're not vomiting, they might avoid them. They might avoid school, movie scenes that feature vomit, things like that. So again, it's hard to define, but I think going back to the earlier slide, the first slide about general rules of thumb, if you're seeing, again, a pattern in any of these three, it could be a sign of anxiety.
And I think one more that I would just add to it, because I think the somatic or physical symptoms and avoidance are really the two biggies, but also common with anxiety, as well as with a host of other different mental health difficulties, but having kind of like sticky worries that just kind of keep coming up. And this can be if your student is specifically worried about something like social situations, the worries might be very focused on what did they think of me? Were they judging me? Do they like me, which can also be normal for teens, but kind of excessive and hard to move on from. There's also a lot of kids experience anxiety where the worries are more diffuse and they're about a variety of different situations. So everything from their academic performance to the state of the world, to their family's health, to safety. And the key thing, because we all worry, it's part of being human, but the key thing that starts to tip this into more of an anxiety concern is when the worries are excessive. So they're occurring a lot of the day and they're hard to control. So the child or the student is not able to kind of shift or to say, okay, I'm not going to worry about that right now, or I can handle this, or that's not really true. Any of the ways that folks without anxiety tend to cope with worry thoughts, when they kind of stay stuck in those worries, that can be another sign. But again, like I said at the beginning, a caveat that sticky racing thoughts can show up in a variety of different difficulties, but often come along with anxiety.
That's a great point. And I think related to that, seeking reassurance is really common in teens with anxiety too. So a typical teen might every once in a while ask like, do I look okay? Or, did this email sound okay? But often for teens with significant or kind of clinical levels of anxiety, they're frequently asking an adult, like a parent, a question over and over again. So for kids who are anxious about getting sick, they might repeatedly ask, do I look pale? Can you take my temperature? Do I have a fever? And it's almost like no matter how much you give that reassurance, it's never enough. And it just becomes this cycle where it reinforces it. So frequent kind of seeking reassurance or asking potential like what if questions for that more generalized group of anxiety, like, well, what happens if the vaccines never come out? Or what happens if, global warming doesn't get fixed? These kind of like general hypothetical what if questions can be a sign of anxiety as well. And then we just have a couple more slides before we move on to questions, but something that we wanted to touch upon is just how you as parents are in such an incredibly tough position during adolescence. I think there's a lot to juggle. There's a lot of what we call dialectics, which is just the way of saying like two things that seem opposite, but can be true at the same time. And so we've got up here a couple of kind of classic parenting dialectics, those things that you guys are all juggling. And there's three big ones. The first is kind of balancing being like too loose with your kids versus too strict. And so what we mean by that is like having kind of clear, consistently enforced rules and at the same time, like being willing to negotiate on some issues and not overusing consequences. So an example of kind of finding that balance might be like, let's say you have a curfew for your kids, but every once in a while you make an exception if there's, a special occasion like a friend's birthday and, they've given you the address of where they're going to be, the phone number, things like that. The second big dialectic is making light of problem behaviors versus making too much of typical adolescent behaviors, which kind of gets at some of the earlier slides. So recognizing like, when does my teen's behavior kind of cross that line and I need to get help? And recognizing like which behaviors are kind of part of typical adolescent development. And it's not always obvious. I think there's a lot of gray areas here. An example of that could be like, it's pretty typical for kids to be irritable, to snap, to be kind of more critical of their parents. It's not so typical to get, like I said earlier, physically aggressive, to repeatedly use disrespectful language if that's a clear kind of rule violation in your household. So again, just finding that balance of kind of what's typical and what might be kind of crossing into a more problematic territory. And then the third dialectic is fostering independence versus fostering dependence. And so this is like, how do you kind of offer your teen guidance, support, coaching, encouragement, and when do you kind of gradually offer them more independence while still sort of encouraging them to seek help when it's appropriate? And again, there's no like manual on how to do this. There's no kind of clear guidelines, but an example of this, could be offering to help proofread an essay, but not writing the essay for them, right? That is sort of finding that balance, or teaching them how to cook a simple dinner versus like, always doing it for them or cooking them a different meal if they don't like what you're cooking. Like you can kind of scaffold and teach them how to do it. And often kids really like that autonomy, and it teaches them a new skill. It's a little bit more work in the short term if you're teaching them a skill, but in the long run, it's going to make your life easier. So those are the kind of big dialectics and the tricky position that you all are in. And then the last slide is just kind of a quick one on setting limits. I know this is something that came up in the questions again, but just in thinking about your 9th and 10th graders, it's important just to remember like the adolescent brain is still developing. And so there's going to be times when they do need your help and your guidance in kind of setting limits. And so one example of that I think that comes up in school a lot is like, in choosing classes and in figuring out like how many should they take, how many AP classes should they take, how many extracurriculars should they sign up for. And it's really important to consider your child's personal strengths and weaknesses when setting limits and thinking about like, okay, what do they feel pretty comfortable with versus what's a little bit harder for them? Like what do they struggle, for example, with perfectionism? So I know we've got some teens out there who are really perfectionistic, have really high standards. And so for those kids, you might want to consider like helping them set limits with how many AP classes they take. If your kid is going to sign up for all the AP classes and that's going to make them super anxious, right? Or maybe kind of guiding them or setting some limits about how many extracurricular activities they sign up for. Like maybe they want all the extracurriculars because they think that's what's going to get them into Yale. And for you, it's like, okay, but your mental health is important too. And so maybe we limit it to like 2 extracurricular activities. Another example, if your teen, let's say a strength is they're super creative, but their weakness is they struggle with impulse control. You might need for that child to monitor their internet use a little bit more, or to set greater limits around the internet use, around how often they can do it or which websites they can access. So those are just a couple examples, but really thinking about your individual teen and kind of what some of their, what we call lagging skills might be, where they need a little like more parental guidance or support. Okay, we'll post the survey link at the end, but I want to make sure we get to some questions. So let me pull those up. And thank you for those who submitted questions in advance. Julie and I are just going to take turns going through them. Julie, if you want to start.
Absolutely. And so some of this will be a tiny bit of a repeat because we covered some of the information in our slides, but can just delve into a little bit more detail. So the first question that we received was, can you describe healthy anxiety versus unhealthy anxiety in a teen? That's such a good question. And this kind of goes back to that first slide that Michelle talked about, where we think about kind of what is typical anxiety, because as many of you probably know, we need anxiety. Anxiety is actually a really, really helpful emotion. It motivates our behavior. It gets us to do stuff. It keeps us safe. We need anxiety. And so accordingly, stuff, anxiety that's typical could be like feeling nervous before an event, feeling nervous before a test or a sports game or a presentation. That is completely normal. And again, it's actually useful to motivate us to study, to practice, to prep. Asking for a little bit of reassurance every once in a while. So, you know, hey parent, I'm feeling kind of worried about this test, you know, can we check how much I studied, or whatever it might be, but just every once in a while, like, hey, is this normal? Or hey, this is something I'm feeling uncomfortable about. Feeling kind of awkward and embarrassed to ask a teacher for help, but still being capable of doing it. So some of those like developing life skills that younger high school students are working on, totally normal to feel anxious in those situations. What starts to move into atypical, and it's on a continuum, it really is, but getting into the atypical area is when anxiety is starting to cause impairment in daily functioning. So like what Michelle talked about earlier, but this would be, you know, not doing work, not socializing, or doing those things minimally, avoiding situations to the extent that it impacts their ability to do what they need to do, reporting just a lot of distress. And again, we can't say this enough. Watch out for those somatic or physical symptoms. A lot of times, particularly with younger kids, but even older teens and adults for that matter, we experience distress in our bodies and might not have the emotional awareness or the words to say this is anxiety, but those chronic headaches, stomach aches with no medical cause, those can be a red flag for anxiety. The response just being disproportionate to the situation. So if something, again, finding that balance between making light of problems or making too much of problems, but if just objectively the teen's response is a lot bigger than the situation calls for, that can be a sign. And then we already talked about seeking excessive reassurance. The take home is basically when anxiety is getting in the way of your student like doing their job, which is to be a student and to socialize and to be an active, you know, burgeoning member of society, doing what they need to do. That's when we start to think, this is getting a little bit atypical.
Thanks, Julia. So the second question we got was, in the past, my son could easily lose interest in activities like sports or music program after trying one after another. Could this be a sign of teen depression? And so, you know, as we said earlier, a sudden loss of interest in activities that used to be pleasurable could be a sign of depression. It's possible, but it could also be due to a number of other factors. It could be, for example, that they're just following their friend's lead. And so maybe their friend's switching activities, so they want to switch to be with them. It could be that they're just experimenting with different activities as part of, you know, natural identity development, figuring out like, what do they enjoy, what brings them pleasure. It could be social anxiety because, you know, both of those things, music and sports, often have like a performative aspect to them. So maybe when it comes time for the actual game or the performance, they feel anxious. It could be difficulty focusing, short attention span, right? A lot of people sort of on the ADHD spectrum have a short attention span and lose interest in activities and kind of jump around. So it's hard to know without more information, but I would say either way, get curious with your teen and you can say something in a really just kind of like neutral, non-judgmental stance. Like, you know, I noticed you seem to lose interest in soccer and I'm just wondering what led to that, you know, or it seems like you used to really enjoy playing the violin and now it seems like you don't. What's been going on? I'm just curious. And if it turns out that it's just, you know, they're trying on different things and they're kind of just exploring their identity, you can help them do that. You can help them kind of identify what are some of their values, you know, and what kind of student do they want to be? What do they care about? What are they passionate about? And help kind of link those two activities or link activities to their values. So if and when talking to them, you're not, you know, they're just like, I just really want to help others. Cool. Maybe we can look into some volunteer activities, you know, like a big brother, big sister program or tutoring or something like that. So I think it really just depends. And either way, always getting curious with your kids and kind of approaching it in a really just curious, non-judgmental stance to let them open up and tell you what's going on.
Thanks, Michelle. So our next question was, my teen has lost focus for classes in this remote setting. Nothing motivates my child except for video games. What can I do about this? I think the first thing that we want to say is this is the number one question that we have gotten from parents and schools since the pandemic started. We see this across every district we work in. We see it across every grade level. We see it in our clinics. We see it in our private practice. So I know it's cold comfort when you are dealing with it on the ground with your kid, and you're not alone, and it's time limited. So that's a very, very good thing about this. But I think it's a really complex question because, so I'll tackle kind of the focus on classes and the video game piece, but video games first. I think it's tricky because video games are how tweens and teens, particularly boys, are socializing these days, like chatting with their friends while they're gaming. And so we might have some different recommendations during the pandemic than what we would recommend normally, but we just want to put that out there that it's kind of like that double-edged sword where parents typically don't want their kid to be spending all their time gaming, and your kid, at least they're socializing, you know, so it's again, kind of there's pros and cons of it. But kind of getting back to the remote learning, I think an important thing that we can do as adults is actually slightly lower our expectations for how we're defining engagement and learning this year, particularly remote learning. And that might look like, you know, if in previous years it was more evaluating by how are your grades and how is, you know, how much are you learning? Just, are you getting your work done? Are you taking some things out of classes? Are you maintaining some interest, some passion in even just one subject? I think that a lot of how we've been talking about this year in our clinic and with the families that we work with is it's a make it through year. You know, it's a bridge year, and kind of keep that little spark of learning, love of learning alive, knowing that this is not forever. But in terms of some kind of concrete tips for what you can try with your teen, I think first, validating. So explaining that you get it. Playing video games is a lot more fun than remote learning. Remote learning is not nearly as fun compared to in-person learning. So just really normalizing that. I think as parents, when we get scared about our student struggling, we can pretty quickly go to like, do you know how this is going to impact your future? And you need to buckle down, kid, even if it's remote learning. And goes right over their heads, right? We need to first join with them and just help them see that we get it. It's kind of a no-brainer to want to do video games. That is way more reinforcing in the short term. So that first is the validation. And then next, we keep using the expression, get curious. But that's because it's bringing this just gentle, non-judgmental curiosity. Get curious with your kid. What did they enjoy before the pandemic other than video games? Can they find creative ways to continue to do some of those activities? And I'm sure we've all read the umpteen parenting articles on different ways to socialize or maintain hobbies in the pandemic, so I won't revisit that ground now. But having those conversations with your kids, you know, hey, you used to really love art, and I know you can't go to after-school art club anymore. Can you set that up with a friend on Zoom? Can you do a virtual art show? Whatever it might be, but really showing them that you want to carve out that time to help them. And then another thing to consider is setting limits on video games. As the mental health folks from Belmont were saying when we joined, designating screen-free or Wi-Fi or phone data-free times and places in the house. And I think a key thing is that parents need to abide by the rules too. You're modeling for your kids, and it can be wonderful. It's like taking a shower from the screens. The whole family gets some downtime. So that can be another way to set some limits. And then again, if video games are truly the only thing that is motivating your kid right now, thinking about using it as a contingency. And what we mean as a contingency is essentially video games are a privilege. They're not a universal right for all teens. And thinking with your teen about how can they earn that privilege by doing X, Y, and Z. So being really specific, it's logging onto their classroom, it's completing 80% of their Google Class assignments, it's, you know, whatever it might be, but doing that to get the video games.
So the next question is, for the past 2 years, my son is joining less and less family outdoor activities. Instead, he would rather stay at home. He does like to hang out with his friends, though. Is this a typical teen's behavior? So the short answer is yes. It's a perfectly normal part of adolescent development that, again, peers become their primary interest and they kind of move away from spending time with family. You know, lots of teens are less excited to spend time with family than they were when they were younger, or they feel more embarrassed to be seen with their parents, especially out and about. And I just want to validate, like, that can be really hard and painful as a parent, especially if you had a really close relationship when your teen was younger and this feels like a shift. It can be really, really hard. Know that it's not going to last forever. And it's not personal. It's normal. It's healthy. It's a healthy part of their ability to develop independence and autonomy. I think the middle ground is like, see if you can find some common ground with their activities and like join them in the things that they're interested every now and then. Maybe it's not every night, but maybe it's once a week. Like, could they teach you the video game that they love? I think a lot of kids would actually be like super psyched to play with their parents. Could you, walk the dog with them, or could you both go out in the backyard and play with the dog? Could you watch, a favorite like trashy TV show that they like to watch, but kind of meeting them where they're at, even if it's not necessarily them like joining the family picnic or something like that, or the family, outing, but just kind of finding something that they enjoy and trying to join with them. And I think no matter what, just letting them know that you're there for them. Like anytime they want to talk, you're available. I think just that's the most important message you can give your kids is I'm here if you need me, kind of just leaving that door open for communication.
Yeah, I mean, we can't emphasize enough. It's like the longest, shortest time, kind of like the toddler years. This is not going to last forever. And one of the most important things you guys can do as parents is just maintain that connection, be there for them. Also balancing with limits and boundaries, but keeping that really warm relationship wherever you can. So our next question, most of the time, my son likes to stay in his room with the door closed. Should we allow him to do so? If not, what's the best way to leave the door unlocked? So I think the first thing that we need to think about here is, do you have any reason to suspect that your son's doing something risky in there? And I think different families have different definitions of what's risky. I think we often think of things like, could he be self-harming or engaging in dangerous behaviors on the internet, or using drugs, or just kind of, do you have any reasons to be concerned? If so, then, it's a different response. But if not, it could just be a normal desire for privacy, that developmentally appropriate desire again, and wanting to prevent someone, be it a parent or sibling or a pet, from barging in. That being said, every family has different values and has different rules. And so if you're concerned, or if you feel strongly that doors should not be locked in your house, talk to your teen and do it in a calm moment. This is one of, I think, the hardest things ever with parenting, because it's in the heat of the moment that we want to just address it and solve the problem, but nobody thinks clearly and is able to handle big emotions effectively in those hot moments. So wait for a calm moment, go on a walk, go on a drive, something like that, where you can just have a calm conversation. Start with validation. So it makes so much sense that you want privacy, totally get wanting to have your door closed. I would get curious about why they want the door closed as well. It's constantly illuminating the things that teens are actually, looking for in a given situation. You might be surprised why it's important to your teen. So validate, get curious. But then if it's still a no-go for you and your family, let them know why you're not comfortable with the door being locked. So for example, in case of an emergency, I'm not comfortable having the door locked. And then work together to see if you can agree on a protocol that they feel comfortable with. And so this is an approach where you're going back and forth, just brainstorming different solutions, but it helps to get your teens buy-in if they are part of making the solution, rather than having a solution handed to them from parents on high. And so, for example, a solution could be everybody agrees to knock and wait for a response before entering, and then really stick with it. Show them, I respect that you are not locking your door, and I'm going to keep up my end of the bargain. If, it's something like younger siblings tend to barge in, you may need to do some problem solving and working with the younger siblings around that. But it's validate, get curious, and then join with your teen to come up with a solution that works for both of you.
Thanks, Julia. And we have 3 more questions, and then if there's time, we'll answer some of the live questions that I see are submitted. So the next question is, are there good suggestions for luring a teen back to family time if the family is having a hard time engaging with the teen? This one just made me smile because of the luring, like we have to be sneaky about it. Again, I just want to put into perspective again that it's totally normal for adolescents to start to drift away from family, and that their focus is primarily on their peers. I really can't overstate that, because I think it can be a really big shift starting in like middle school to high school that we're seeing that. And again, it can feel really hard for family members, especially for parents or for younger siblings who aren't getting that quality time. And so I think a piece of this is just you as the parent kind of practicing some acceptance that assuming, that you're not seeing any of those red flags that we talked about, just reminding yourself this is normal. It's not forever. They'll come back to you. But this is healthy and typical. And I think you can let your teen know that you understand their desire for independence. So again, just kind of validating, I get it. we're not your favorite people right now. And like, I miss spending time with you. I really enjoy hanging out with you. And see if you can kind of collaboratively develop or create like a new tradition in the family where you get to spend a little time together, and really ask them to be a part of that and coming up with ideas like Julia said earlier. So maybe it's like, could one night a week, like could Friday night be a family movie night or a game night? Or could it be like a make your own pizza night? So it's happening during dinner, but there's still a little bit more sort of playfulness happening. Let your kids choose, or let them, come up with some ideas. I think dinner time in general also is just a really nice place to introduce some new traditions and to kind of shake things up a little bit. And so a lot of families, for example, do like you go around and you say your rose and your thorn of the day. So kind of a highlight and a low light of the day. That can be a really nice way of opening up a conversation with your kids. Another kind of fun thing to do is to look up like icebreaker questions, just kind of silly, fun questions. Like if you could have a superpower, what would it be? Write them on a piece of paper, put them in a jar, and each night, like a family member picks a question out of the jar. And so if you want more ideas, the Family Dinner Project, which was kind of the love child of some researchers at MGH who are family therapists that Julia and I used to work with, they started this nonprofit called the Family Dinner Project. And it's all about like, how do you use dinner time to engage with your kids? And it's all research based. And so they have a lot of really fun activities and a lot of fun ideas like those icebreaker questions. So feel free to Google that. But again, I think it's just getting creative and figuring out like fun ways to engage them. And I think, again, ask if they'd be open to you joining them for an activity they enjoy. So whether it's like, show me Britney Spears's Instagram, right? Like kids are so into that. Or like, can I watch that reality TV show with you one night a week? I think joining them in their interests versus trying to lure them into something that you enjoy, but they, might not anymore.
Love the Britney Spears plug, Michelle. That's awesome. So our next question is, how much alone time is normal for a teen in lockdown? Even though we're in the same house, we rarely see our teen these days. And so we hesitate to define kind of like a specific quantity of time because it's dependent on so many different variables, like how much space is there in your home? Who else is home during the day? What are they actually doing in the room? Do they come down for meals? How is their mood? Are they getting out of bed? Are they engaged? There's so many different factors that can make alone time, enriched or more or less helpful. But just kind of, again, rule of thumb, it's normal for teens to crave more privacy. And actually, particularly during the pandemic, if they're used to having more alone time in the house. I think, in normal teen life, they might be home alone after school for a couple hours, and they probably really valued that time. Or on Saturday mornings, if parents are at the little sibling soccer game, they've got a couple hours just kind of bum around the house and be by themselves. And so I think it kind of can't be understated that teens really do like their privacy and their alone time, and they're going to seek it out if they're not getting as much of it as normal. But, assuming that their mood seems okay and they're engaged in learning and there's no huge red flags from what we've talked about, it's okay for them to have that alone time. And to Michelle's points earlier, I think consider just proposing a nightly or a weekly designated family activity and let them play a role in choosing that activity. So Netflix, baking, walking the dog, whatever it might be. But kind of having that time so that you as the parents can look forward to it. And believe it or not, teens do too. They like having that structure and kind of that predictable time with you. But I think it also then just takes some of the pressure off when they're in their room a lot, because okay, 7:30 to 8:30, it is family game time. And of course, encouraging them, if all the alone time is happening sitting in front of a computer in their room, encouraging them to get some kind of exercise and fresh air, because that's super important for mental health and physical health.
Okay, so we have our last pre-submitted question, and then we'll jump to a couple in the Q&A. Okay, so the last question is, we always hear that losing interest in things that used to bring joy is a hallmark of depression, but it seems that none of us in our house are enjoying things like we used to. Is this normal during COVID, or is this a concern? This is a really good question and a really great point. I think this is something like almost everyone is experiencing. It's what we call anhedonia, or again, just that loss of pleasure in previously enjoyed activities. And again, it's common between COVID, winter blues, like a lot of us just aren't kind of experiencing the same degree of pleasure. And also because I think the variety of activities is so minimized at this point. Like I know for me, I love hiking, but like I do it every weekend and it's kind of like lost its charm at this point. Same with Netflix. So I think first of all, just like acknowledging that within your family and validating whether it's a partner or a teen who's experiencing this, like, I'm with you. It is really hard right now. We're so limited in what we can do. I think just to clarify though, anhedonia, or again, this loss of pleasure, it's one potential symptom of depression. But as Julia said earlier, a person needs to experience other symptoms most of the day, nearly every day for several weeks at a time. So just experiencing anhedonia alone doesn't necessarily mean that you're depressed. And so I think, you can get creative and find like small ways to still do fun things. And I think this is also a really nice time to kind of shift our focus and use some of that mindfulness or focus on gratitude. And so maybe the focus isn't so much like pure joy and fun, but is it like finding meaning in the small things? And so I would encourage you, parents, and your teens, but to model this, to try using mindfulness for really like those small parts of your day, like really savoring a cup of coffee, noticing the scents, feeling the warmth, savoring a sweet. You could do this with dessert. You could even invite your teen to join you, like eating it really slowly, noticing what they taste, what smells, what it feels like. With a walk outside, you could mindfully listen to a favorite song. Just see if it brings you like a tiny drop of joy to your day or kind of boost your mood. Similarly, I think with gratitude, practicing like each day, writing down 3 things that you're grateful for and just taking a couple seconds to appreciate each of them, and really including like those smaller things that might not be as obvious, just appreciating like having the warm heat. There are some people right now who don't have that. And I think just kind of taking time to express gratitude can often boost our mood. And then 2 other thoughts. So volunteering is another thing. Really, when we give to others and kind of shift our focus to helping other people, that often gives us a sense of fulfillment. We feel a sense of kind of usefulness. And so volunteering, if you can find a way to do it virtually, or I know there are some like parks or like bird sanctuaries or places where you can go and help clear trails, get some fresh air, donate some clothes, something like that. And inviting your teen can be really helpful. Similarly, learning a new skill and building mastery week by week, so for me, like I'm learning to knit and it's been a fun challenge, or baking, or just whatever it is. You can, again, get curious with your teen and see if there's something kind of fun that they'd like to try. Research shows that building mastery and working towards a goal can help boost our mood. And the last thing I just want to say about this question is like, hang in there. I think we're all feeling this. The good news is vaccines are being rolled out. We're more than halfway through winter. It's getting lighter out. So hang in there. We'll get through it. And my guess is a lot of these things will improve a bit when spring comes. So those were all the questions we got in advance. And I see we have a couple questions in the chat. Julie, I don't know if you want to start and then I can take one.
Yeah, Sherry, did you?
No, I was just going to ask Julie if you could answer them, just because I think we're having some I don't know if other people it's breaking up a lot. Maybe it's just me. Maybe we're fine.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
we are happy to dive in, and obviously Belmont folks, please add anything that you'd like. So first question that we got, do you see kids going in and out of certain behaviors that are kind of considered normal teen, then concerned teen, then they seem to kind of correct themselves when they see friends or participate in activities, or perhaps they become the more concerning teen due to like a dating and breakup situation, the normal teen once the drama's over? So the short answer is yes. Yes, we definitely do see that. And this is kind of like what Michelle was touching on in terms of normal teen behaviors. Experimentation is super, super normal, and feeling like day to day, your kids' interests might shift, or maybe more week to week, month to month. Your kids' interests are shifting, and the things they're passionate about, that kind of experimentation and exploration is totally normal. I think as well, in terms of concerned behaviors, it's a spectrum, right? So there is, my teen swore at me and they never do that on one end of the spectrum. And then there's using hard drugs and self-harming on the other end of the spectrum. And it is less typical to kind of dabble in risky behaviors and then kind of come back. It's at least a cause for concern if that's only even happening once or twice. That's a reason to chat with your pediatrician or your counselor, seek some support. But if we're staying in kind of the not super scary end of the concerning behavior spectrum, it is relatively typical. And similarly, it's really normal for teens to shift their behavior based on their friends. That it's part of identity development, is trying on different ways of being in the world. And friends have a huge influence on teens. I think when we start to move into less typical is when, that's kind of on a day-to-day basis and the teen seems to have kind of no inner sense of who they are whatsoever. Like there's not even kind of one core value that they're consistent with. And still, I'm hesitant to call that super concerning because it is part of adolescent development. And then again, with the question of a breakup, yeah, we can all probably think of examples from our own teen years, right? When we're super emotionally distressed and we did or said things that we wouldn't normally do or weren't in keeping with the kind of person that we wanted to be. Again, though, we just look, is your teen bouncing back relatively quickly? And are they not going to that more risky side of the concerning behavior spectrum? That's when you do want to intervene.
Totally agree. And just to give examples, like a kid cutting after a breakup, that's cause for concern, right? Versus like a lot of crying or, eating more ice cream than they normally would or something like that, keeping an eye out or suicidal statements or something like that. The next question is, do you have advice on finding a therapist for a minor? This is a great question. I always say start with the pediatrician because they know who's in network and can give recommendations. You can ask your school counselors right here because we've given them a list of some community referral ideas. And third is Psychology Today. It's a website you can Google, and it's helpful because you can limit by like insurance, location, if your child has a preference for the gender of the therapist. I think those are good places to start.
Agreed. How does one differentiate normal drug exploration versus problematic behavior? How common is drug exploration at this age? Does that mean weed, other drugs? Are you aware of parent support groups that could help with perspective and or strategies? Oh, these are so many good questions. And I am going to lean on all my colleagues here because as I'm reading through this, I don't have like a kind of black and white answer. I think that, and I will also just own, I'm speaking for, I think both of us, Michelle and I are anxiety and mood experts. We're less in the substance use realm, but kind of what we would look for in our clinic. I think more typical exploration of drugs, just what we see anecdotally, is kids experimenting with marijuana, with vaping, with juuling, seeing that in smaller amounts, maybe if it's happening in their social setting, if it's coming up with peers. I think what starts to raise more flags for me, if a kid comes into my practice reporting this, are things, drugs kind of beyond that. So prescription drugs, cocaine, heroin, Molly, things like that. It just, I hear it less commonly. So that would raise a flag. I think also using drugs on their own is something else that I look for. Using frequently, using regularly. Are they buying it themselves? Selling is certainly a concern. And so again, I don't really, I think somebody with substance use expertise might have a different answer, but those are generally the things that I look for in terms of what feels a little bit more run of the mill versus cause for concern. Michelle or other folks, do you have anything that you'd add or change in that answer?
I agree with Julia. I mean, I think, again, it always comes back to those first three like signs to look out for. If your kid is like not going to school because they're high, or they're in class that they're high, or they seem high, if it's causing problems, like if you're noticing it, like that's a sign of concern for me. If they're like driving high, things like that. And I think even if it's kind of normal drug exploration, it's still important to talk with your kids about kind of your values and safety, and depending on your own personal family values, right? Letting them know, like, listen, I know it's difficult to experiment with this stuff. I don't want you driving high, or I want you to call me if you're feeling unsafe. I think figuring out for you and with if there's a partner, like what are your values? What's your comfort level? And having an open conversation with your kids about this. Because I think the worst thing that can happen is you never talk about it, and then they kind of go underground with it, and you may not know that it's happening, for example. But yeah, counselors, feel free to jump in if you have thoughts.
I'd agree with what you said too.
And I just want to reiterate Michelle's last point about talking about it. I think that these they can feel like really awkward, sticky conversations to have as parents. And sometimes parents have the concern, if I bring this up to my child, they'll have a big reaction, or there'll be some kind of fallout from it. And it's always better to start the conversation and to do it. Those principles we keep coming back to, and kind of just getting curious, non-judgmental, but then also setting those boundaries, but kind of opening, like, I've noticed this, can we talk about this? And starting the conversation with them. Always better to talk.
Absolutely. And so I'm noticing the time. Unfortunately, we didn't get to the last few questions, but feel free to reach out to your counselors and we're happy to kind of email some answers. But thank you all. It was really great to be with you.
Do we have anything that any of the counselors want to add in closing? We're so appreciative of everyone who has stayed online throughout this whole presentation, and you know, I want to thank our practitioners from McLean's. It's you know, the information that you've shared has been really super helpful. I know I've gleaned a few things that is going to inform my parenting as well as my practice at the high school. Mr. Brown, or do any of the counselors want to add anything in closing?
No, I mean, I think this was very helpful. A lot of good resources. You know, if parents have any individual questions, please feel free to reach out to the counselors, and you know, in a more one-on-one setting if you feel that's kind of a better venue for you. But I think it's been a great morning. We appreciate so many parents taking time out of their day to listen.
And just to add in closing, we will post that information about how to join the webinar this evening about SAT and ACT information. I've listened to that presentation before. It's incredibly informative. So if you have any questions, it might not be relevant this year, but moving forward and sort of planning, I would definitely recommend it if you have the time to join this evening.
Yes, and it's actually listed if you go on the Belmont High School webpage. If you go under news, they have it posted there. There's a link there. I am trying to get it also on our guidance webpage as well, but it is already on the news page.
Yeah.
Also, please look out for this recorded session. It has been recorded and we're going to do our best to try to post it.
Are we able to stop recording for our meeting?